All right, Panthers fans, we're going to play a little game today. It's called Can We Finish This Episode Before EJ Gets Second-Degree Sunburn?
Or melts.
Yeah, as an Irish person, he's not necessarily built for the sun, which is why he lives up here in the Pacific Northwest. Set up here in Anderson Island. It's a beautiful day, by the way. I don't know if our current angles do it justice, so we'll throw in a little B-roll that I took of the setup today. The sun's out, water's glassy smooth, temperature's perfect. There's no seagulls pissing us off this time like they did for the Patriots episode. It's a great day to talk Panthers football. I will say they're a little bit of a low-hanging fruit for national media in the sense that I think people have gotten into the habit of just saying Panthers bad and not really digging into some of the positives that exist. I'm not saying the Panthers are going to be a great team this year, but I feel like, and maybe I've even been guilty of this a little bit before kind of preparing for this episode, I feel like people don't look past the surface of the Panthers because the surface has been so rough, right? And I'm talking ownership, prior coaching staffs, the state of the roster last year. And I think because that surface has been so ugly, people have neglected to look under it and see like, okay, well, what else is there? I'll tell you what. If you dig under the surface a little bit, like there's actually a lot to be excited about here. Again, not saying they're going to be a great team, but oh boy, I don't know if I want to be this bold with it, but I think I will. The worst is behind them.
I think they're strong turnaround candidates because of all the things that you said, because everybody is expecting nothing from them, and they really did bottom out last year. They had an awful year. They've had regime change. It's a clean slate. That brings some hope and optimism, but again, they're not starting at zero. Not saying the Panthers are a full and complete roster. They're not. Not saying they are a full and complete organization. They're not yet. They have work to do, but they've taken steps. They're going in the right direction. They are not completely bereft of talent. So, yeah, if you want to take a smart, nuanced look at the Panthers, you could say, look, they don't have to be a 10-win team to have a very successful season. Right? They won 2 last year. If they won 6 or 8 this year and, challenge down to the line and a couple of others, that's a great season and they can build on that. And I think that's possible. That is within the realm of possibility.
The goal is, number one, to be watchable, like competitive, you know, not just getting absolutely obliterated. And secondarily, the goal is just to get Bryce Young on the right track. I don't even care about wins and losses. Like, obviously, wins and losses are nice, sure. But the real thing is like let's make sure Bryce Young works, right?
Let's be competent as a football team and start there. And I think given the folks they have in place now, that is an absolutely attainable goal.
Lots to go over today. Schematic changes, personnel changes, coaching changes. It's a brand new organization in a lot of ways. So if you're a Panthers fan, sit tight. Lots to go over today. If you're not a Panthers fan, I still encourage you to sit tight because this team gets virtually no national coverage, and this might be your best chance to learn a little bit about what's going on in Carolina this offseason. So with that, Jay, Autumn, Anthony, roll the intro. Welcome back to the Bootleg Football Podcast. I'm Brett. That's EJ talking Carolina Panthers today. We're only going to spend a little bit of time on 2023 just to kind of give a proper little recap, but we promise we'll spend most of this episode on 2024 and everything that ideally is positive that you have in store for your future. Before we dive into everything, though, do want to thank our friends over at Underdog Fantasy for helping to make this series possible in the first place. If this is the first episode you're watching in this series, we do this for all 32 teams. So we go division by division, week by week for basically 8 straight weeks. We do one episode on every single team. We break down what happened last year, what's happened in the offseason, what we think is going to happen this season. It's more of a what are these teams capable of type series more so than what they will do, because obviously shit happens in the NFL. People get hurt. Things go off the rails. It's less of a prediction and more so just a primer of what every team potentially could achieve if everything goes absolutely correctly. So now that I've thrown enough caveats in there, but want to thank Underdog Fantasy for helping to make this entire series possible. We literally would not be able to do it without them, especially out here on the water in a great location. Up here in the Pacific Northwest. If you're watching sports all summer long, whether it's baseball, whether it's hockey, whether it's basketball, whether it's golf, whether it's racing, whether you're getting ready for the NFL season with season-long pick'ems, or you're doing best ball drafts, pretty much anything and everything sports related, you can play along on Underdog Fantasy. If you use promo code BOOTLEG, not only will you get a free pick'em special in the lobby, you're also going to get up to $250 in bonus cash as well. And if you live in North Carolina, Underdog also recently launched a sports book, North Carolina too. It's the first state they're active in. So if there was ever an episode that had a bunch of North Carolina residents watching it, it would be that one. So you could check that out in the link in the description below and the QR code on the screen. Again, promo code BOOTLEG gets you a whole bunch of extra added goodies on top of that. With that, EJ, I turn the floor over to you to talk a little bit about 2023. I just make one request on behalf of the Panthers fans watching this. Please be gentle.
I have Panthers fans in my life, so I will be gentle. 2023 results, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it does set the floor for why everything that has happened did happen. Overall record 2-15, ranked in the division 4th. Home record 2-6. Road record super painful. No way to be gentle about this. 0-9.
Yikes.
Didn't win a game away from their home stadium. Only won 2 in their stadium. Last 5 games, 1-4. That's pretty predictable. We've got a couple of numbers to help dive into that and basically parse out some of the reasons it happened. Not all of the reasons it happened. I don't know that we've got long enough to cover all of them. The first one is called quarterback support, or QBS. It's a stat that I came up with Arjun Menon from PFF a couple months ago. So link in the description if you want to see exactly how it's made. But basically, it's 3 offensive measurements, 1 defensive measurement, 1 special teams measurement that really talk about how a team set the stage. You can think of it as how well they should have done, how much support they provided their quarterback. And in the case of Carolina, it wasn't very much. Scale is 0 to 100. Worst team in the league is a 0. Best team in the league is 100. The Panthers were a 3.2.
And even that seems high.
And it is a little higher than you might think if you're a Carolina fan, because that placed Carolina 31st out of 32 teams. They were not last.
For the record, the only team worse than that were the New York Giants, who ended up with the 6th overall pick, while the Panthers, could have ended up with the 1st overall pick, didn't get the 1st overall pick. It's probably the only time I'm going to bring up that trade for the sake of Panthers fans to mental health. But I think the fact that the Giants were, by a lot of measures, the worst team in the league. They had equally bad pass protection, pretty much no pass rush, pretty much no weapons. I know Panthers fans are like, well, that sounds like us. Giants were worse, slightly.
Like that, but worse.
But I think the difference is that they had Brian Dable, who could elevate possibly the worst roster in the league to only being the 6th overall pick. So, it helps to have a pretty good head coach, which Panthers, unfortunately, had a little bit of a coaching deficiency last year.
Yeah, and they've changed that. The second number is Power Score, which we introduced you to in this series last year. For those of you unfamiliar, it's 6 ranks: rushing offense, passing offense, rushing defense, passing defense, points scored and points allowed, and we simply assign the team their league rank. Where did they finish among their peers? Were they 10th? Were they 20th? We'll see. Of course, everybody wants to be first, but rushing offense for the Panthers, 24th. Passing offense, 29th. Rush defense, dead last. They got the rouge on this one, 32. Pass defense, 17th. Points scored, another dead last place finish, and that was really the death knell of this team. They couldn't score points. They were 32 there. And points allowed, 29, not much better. So just bouncing off the bottom in all 6 of these ranks. So their Power Score, which you can really think of as how did they do, as opposed to QBS being how should they have done, was 27.1, and that was 32nd overall. So they should have done the 31st best, and they did do the 32nd best.
Oh, is that all?
It's about the same.
I said be gentle. This is not gentle.
This is as gentle as you can go. The 2023 Panthers came apart at the seams. They couldn't protect. Everything fell apart from there. Regime change came as a result in 2024. There, we're done with the 2023 summary.
I do just have one more note on 2023. Sorry, I know I don't mean to belabor the point. If you want a more detailed look on what exactly happened, like how QBS was so low, because again, pass blocking efficiency factors into that metric, how open receivers are on average factors into that metric. If you want to see like why pass protection was so bad, why their guys couldn't get open, like how terrible they were in terms of separating from defenders, go type in QB School Panthers. He has a whole, JT O'Sullivan, our friend, has a whole bunch of videos where he was breaking down Bryce Young throughout his rookie year and just showing all the shit he had to deal with from a schematic perspective, from a weapons perspective, from a pass pro perspective. That'll give you a pretty good idea of why their QBS was so damn low. All right, now that's the end of 2023, I promise. Turning the page 2024, I thought they did a very good job overall, phase to phase throughout the offseason between making the coaching hire, how they executed free agency, how they executed the draft. They did a phenomenal job. Better than I thought they were going to be capable of doing in just 1 year. Like, I thought this was going to be a much longer, much more arduous process in terms of getting more weapons and improving the protection. But I mean, they committed every possible resource to just saying like, no, we're going to take care of all this right now. We're going to pay a bunch of offensive linemen a bunch of money. We're going to, get Deontay Johnson. We're going to invest in weapons in the draft. Like, they did not mess around. And they're like, we're going to do this now, all in one offseason, remake the offense. We were terrible. We don't want to be terrible. And I commend them for that aggression. Now, David Tepper's known for being a very aggressive owner, so I'm also like not super surprised by it, because of course, if any owner is going to be like, screw this, throw all the money at the problem, it's going to be him. But I respect the aggression and, quite frankly, the balls it took for the organization to just completely hit the reset button in 1 year.
I think the speed is the most impressive thing. Again, at the end of last season, you knew what needed to be done. I think the organization knew it needed to be done as well. And lots of owners have aggression. Lots of owners have money. They want things done fast. But it doesn't always work out. In fact, a lot of times it doesn't. They get aggressive. They try and do things quickly. And it doesn't really add up. And they end up sort of resetting from the reset.
Hell, that's literally Dave Tepper. How many times has he done that now? But this time it's going to work.
But this time it's different. It does feel different. We'll talk about some of the personnel changes after you go through some scheme information and really say why it feels different. I think it's the choices the organization made at the top, and then those people were making the rest of the choices that we feel pretty good about. So those are very important choices. We'll talk about those when we get to them, but it feels like they made the right ones. And in turn, the people they chose, it's sort of a cascade of good decisions, which this organization's not particularly used to.
An owner's only job, or only two jobs, is to write whatever checks are necessary to be written in order to give your GM the most tools possible to manipulate the salary cap, which requires an owner that's willing to put a lot of money into escrow year after year in order to make contracts flexible, right? Because like the cap is flexible if you're willing to spend more in just raw cash, right?
Sure.
And so Tepper does check that box. But after that, it's just about hiring the right people that determine where those checks go and then staying the hell out of the way.
Don't tell them that.
It kind of feels like Tepper is, or maybe is transitioning into staying the hell out of the way. It almost kind of reminds me of like Jed York with the Niners, like early on, or rather in like the early 2010s, right? Where he's willing to spend on whatever had to be spent, or willing to spend whatever money had to be spent, right? But he meddled, right? He wanted to put his imprint on the team, just like Eddie DeBartolo did back in the day. And he ran off a lot of good coaches, and, all of a sudden the team went from, championship contender year after year in the Harbaugh era to really just utterly terrible. And then Jed York learned from that. A few years later, hired Kyle Shanahan, hired John Lynch. He hired people that know how to make good decisions to tell him where to spend the money properly. And then he stayed out of the way. And look at what the Niners are now. Like, again, consistent championship contenders year after year. I kind of feel like Tepper might finally be on that part of the arc right? Where it's like he learned, I'm not actually good at making football decisions. I'm going to hire people that I think are making good football decisions. I'll give them whatever money they need, and then I'm just going to hang out in the owner's box and just watch us get better from afar. Like, that's what good owners do. Write checks, stay the fuck away. Hopefully, he's transitioning into being that kind of owner. Ideally, he is. At least early returns on this offseason kind of seems like he is. Now, talking about the schematic changes that we expect to come from this new coaching staff, bringing in Dave Canales, bringing in Idzik, keeping Ejiro Evero, which was one of their biggest moves, which was not making a move at DC. So we'll go over the schematic information, then we'll go over the entire front office makeover. So what is the big difference between Dave Canales and Idzik's offense and what we saw last year from Carolina? It feels like these two guys, and they've worked together going back to their time in Seattle. Mm-hmm. It feels like these two guys are very in tune with whatever their quarterback needs to succeed, whether it was Geno Smith, whether it was Baker Mayfield in Tampa. These two guys are very good at identifying, okay, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and how do we completely maximize those strengths and completely minimize those weaknesses. So when it comes to Geno, like, okay, he throws a really good deep ball outside the numbers. He doesn't work the middle of the field as well, but, let's build an offense out of stretching the field vertically outside the numbers and helping Geno thrive with the types of throws that he's best at. And they did that, right? Then Canales went to Tampa, Idzik went to Tampa. Okay, Baker Mayfield. What is he best at? He's best at working the intermediate middle of the field to his right. His feet and his accuracy and his ball placement, a lot better to his right than to his left. If you're looking at all the passing charts, whether it's not like a quick drop or a 3-step or 5-step, 7-step, if you're looking at all those individual passing charts, his hit rate, from the middle of the field to the right is way better, like startlingly better. And so they built an offense out of that, right? It's, okay, we're going to do a bunch of under center. If we're going to boot him that direction. So he's rolling right and then throwing across his body because he's really good at that. He's not as good at throwing when he's rolling to his left, so we're going to minimize that. All of our quick game stuff, we're going to build it so we're attacking areas of the field that he's more comfortable in terms of, threading needles and all that kind of stuff. All the routes that we have our receivers run, we're going to get them really good at running out-breaking routes to the right because that's Baker's best ball, so we need to make sure his receivers are on point running those routes. In fact, if you look at the top 3 Bucs receivers, Evans, Godwin, and Palmer, like their most caught route, all of them was an out route. Like literally all 3 of them caught more out routes than any other route. Not slants, not curls, like not posts, not anything, not even crossing routes, out routes all day. Why? Because Baker was really good at throwing them, so Idzik dedicated himself to making sure his receivers were very good at running them, getting to the exact right spot at the exact right time, and you better get your toes in bounds. Like, that was what the Bucs were good at. And it looked a lot different than what that duo did in Seattle because they were tailoring all of their passing concepts. They were tailoring the areas of the field they were attacking to what types of throws their quarterback is good at. And I think that's the mark of a good coach, which is we're not going to try to just run what we run and hope you execute it. Right. We're going to see what you can do, and we're going to create an offense out of that. Like if we're going to be under center a lot and our offensive line is really good at running outside zone, we're going to run outside zone. If they're better at running man concepts, we're going to run man concepts. It's kind of refreshing to see coaches at the helm in Carolina now that have that kind of attention to detail where it's not about what they like to run, it's what their players are best at, and that's the system. The system is the personnel. That's a good coach.
Yeah, I think it's what probably gives me the greatest hope about Carolina turning it around from an on-the-field perspective. We'll talk about all the additions and losses and choices they made in personnel to set the stage for that. But in terms of when they get on grass, Dave Canales has been a proven maximizer in his last 2 stops. He did it with Geno in Seattle to a degree that a lot of people didn't think was possible at that point in Geno's career. And then he did it with Baker Mayfield. Same thing. A lot of people said, no, the book's written on Baker. He is what he is. He's a good quarterback, but you're probably not going to get more out of him than that. Canales did. So that's why he feels like the perfect choice to come into Carolina. The book is much shorter on Bryce Young and is not written by any stretch. He's been in the league 1 year. But in terms of a proven guy that can come in and do exactly that, all right, you were the number 1 overall pick in the draft for a reason. You're good at a bunch of things. I'm going to find those things. We're going to dial in on those things. And I'm also going to dial down on asking you to do the things that you're not good at. And that feels like a cooperation and a collaboration that works and that players buy into and really enjoy and then thrive, right? Because they feel like they have a voice. They feel like they're being thought of in the process as opposed to dictated to. And that gives me a lot of hope, not a little hope, that when Carolina hits the field in the fall, the product on the field is going to look very, very different.
Even just looking at, some of the, what do you want to call them? Like team produced Hard Knocks types things, right? Where, they have their own camera crew and they're showing meeting footage and practice footage and they got the coaches mic'd up. And I understand all that's like just team propaganda. But at the same time, it does give you a look at how these coaches interact with the players and everything like that. And it kind of feels like this new staff, or at least the new offensive staff, like Avero's still there, like he's still running his defense, still very good DC. But at least the new offensive staff, there seems to be a premium placed on connection to the players and getting to know the players and getting people to buy in on a personal level, because having buy-in is extremely important. You can have the best scheme in the world, but if guys are half-assing it because they're just not bought into the staff, like what good is it? So it's all about getting players to play hard, to play fast, to understand what you're trying to teach, not just in terms of their individual roles, but also at a conceptual level. Like that is buy-in. It's getting everybody on the same page with high effort, with attention to detail, with discipline. The scheme itself, that'll come later. Like all the little nuances, that'll come later. It's just about building relationships and getting the building connected to each other at this point. And it feels like that coaching staff, or this coaching staff, is really valuing the power of that, and they're spending their entire summer doing that. And that's probably a good transition, by the way, to talking about the rest of this coaching staff, like not just Canales, not just Idzik, not just Giro Vero, but all the front office staff that's there now, all the assistants under them. Like, let's get a good holistic look at who's actually running the show in Carolina.
Yeah, we want to take a more detailed look because there has been such sweeping change. Yes, Giro Vero is still there, but almost everything else is different, as is typical when there is both a new GM and a new coach. So the new GM is Dan Morgan. He's been a rising star in the personnel world for a few years now. I think everybody has been saying this was going to happen. It happens. He gets to go back to a team that he played for, but I don't think that has a lot to do with it, actually. I think that's kind of just how it worked out. It's not familiarity. Dan Morgan was making waves no matter where he was and was being talked about in sort of the same sort of hush tones that people were talking about DeMeco Ryans as a coach. Mm-hmm. Same sort of, he's on his way. He's absolutely going to be a GM, and sooner rather than later. It happens now with Carolina, and we still have a book to write on him as a GM, but I think that book's going to write itself pretty quickly and pretty thoroughly. We've already seen the early returns. Dave Canales, we've talked about, really the QB whisperer of the NFL right now, completed the reclamation of Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, and Bryce Young is hopefully next if you're a Carolina fan. Offensive coordinator Brad Idzik was with Canales both in Seattle and in Tampa, so he's followed him. He's coached wide receivers at both stops, which again is an area that Panthers were extremely deficient in last year, so that's really good news that your OC has a familiarity with exactly what wide receivers need to do. He was a wide receiver himself at Wake Forest, so that's where he started his football learning. Interestingly enough, just in terms of being a sharp cookie, completed a sabbatical term at Cambridge University in England, so Idzik's no dummy.
Also went to high school like 30 miles from where we're at right now. We're on Anderson Island in the Puget Sound. He went to high school on Mercer Island on the other side of Seattle. Is that still technically the Sound?
It's not the Sound. It's in Lake Washington.
A lake?
Yep.
Okay. He went to high school there while his father, John, was working in the personnel department with the Seahawks. And then John went on to be GM of the Jets. Brad was a very highly regarded high school player. Played major college football at Wake. Like that's, D1,
Heck yeah.
ACC. And then has had a pretty successful coaching career ever since then.
Yeah, a rising star in the business for sure. DC, we talked about it, Giro Rivero. It is a good keep. It's not a good get because he was already there, but it's a good keep. We were really happy when he landed there. We were talking about him in this series last year. We're like, this is a solid young coach, but what's going to happen if there's a shift? We didn't think the shift would come this soon. It does. He could have been one and done in Carolina. That, I think, would have been a mistake, and I think Canales and the rest of the staff recognize that. They keep him on. He's a Fangio protege, well-schooled in that system, and again, one of the, I would say, better young coaches in that. It's hard to call it a tree now. It's more like a forest.
It's a web.
Yeah.
Right? And people say, oh, the Fangio tree. Well, it's like the Fangio tree is an offshoot of
Right.
the Ravens tree. And even then, like Fangio's been coaching in the NFL since Rex was like a child. So it's like Fangio has so many influences since before he even worked with Rex.
Yep.
Added a whole bunch of Rex's ideas to what he runs, passed a lot of that down to, whether it's Giro Rivero, Brandon Staley, like the list goes on and on. There's a whole bunch of those guys, right? So it feels like most NFL defenses honestly just run the same stuff at this point because it all kind of comes from the same place. It's just they do it all slightly differently. They all have different processes. They all have different philosophies in terms of what they call and when. But in terms of the terminology, the coaching points, the execution, like a lot of teams run a lot of similar stuff. Avero's just a lot better than most of them in terms of how he calls it.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap. Special teams coach is Tracy Smith. In terms of notable coaches for offense, Harold Goodwin is the assistant head coach and run game coordinator, long-tenured, well-respected coach from Tampa under both Bruce Arians and Todd Bowles, has been coaching in college or the NFL since 1995.
Mm-hmm.
So not surprising. A little surprising he wanted to leave Tampa. He had similar, I think the same title in Tampa for the last couple of years. Follows Canales to the new opportunity in Carolina. Joe Gilbert, the offensive line coach. We got to spend a couple of minutes talking about Joe Gilbert because all eyes are on Gilbert as he tries to reshape this Panthers line. I said that the Panthers couldn't protect and everything fell because of that. There's a lot of talent. They've invested high draft picks and mid-round draft picks in building this offensive line. They did not get returns on all those investments last year. It's Gilbert's job to take those guys and reshape them into, a competent, functional unit. So Gilbert has been in the same role with the Bucs for the last 5 years, coaching their O-line. That means he coached Tristan Wirfs, Shaq Mason, Donovan Smith, Ryan Jensen, Ali Marpet, Alex Kappa, all those folks in that stretch. The Bucs did get returns on their investments in the offensive line, and Carolina is hoping that Gilbert can do exactly the same thing for them.
Goodwin and Gilbert in particular, probably two of the most important hires on this staff, again, for a team that was really, really bad up front and really couldn't run the ball. Like, they are the fixer. Honestly, when we get to the Bucs episode, the coaching section is going to feel a lot less positive because we're like, well, they lost Canales, they lost Hitzik, they lost Gilbert, they took their ball and went home, up to Carolina. It was there was a lot of losses in Tampa coaching wise, and Carolina's going to benefit not just from head coach and coordinator, but also from these two guys, fixing the offensive line and fixing the run game. Massive, massive, massive improvement in terms of the coaching staff here. Rob Moore, wide receivers coach. Again, Idzik's going to have, a pretty hands-on approach with the receivers, but still Rob Moore is a great pick at receiver coach. Carroll for pass game coordinator. Not super familiar with him, but again, excited to see what he can do.
The thing that gets me about him is he's been with the Seahawks for 14 seasons.
He's been there a long time.
Pete's youngest son, but very experienced in his own right. Yes, the NFL is a family business, and he certainly got his start that way, but you don't stay on a staff for 14 years if you don't know your way around football.
Well, if your dad's the head coach, maybe you do.
Right. But interestingly enough, the guy that got tapped to be the head coach here, who was with you on the coaching staff, chose to hire you on.
Very true.
That doesn't happen, especially when you get your own gig. If you're like, I don't like that guy, you're not calling him up and saying, hey, come take an important role for me. And then Bernie Parmalee is the running back coach, played 9 seasons in the NFL. He's been coaching for 15. That makes me feel old, but was a successful running back in his own right. And then pivoting to the defensive side, because we don't want to forget about that. Obviously, the offense is going to get most of the shine, Canales being an offensive head coach. Dom Capers, senior defensive assistant, 50 years of coaching experience, including 38 in the NFL.
I mean, he was the Texans' first head coach when they launched as a franchise in 2002, and he was halfway through his coaching career. Like, that wasn't even like, oh, fresh young coach Don Capers. Like, he was 30 years into it at that point.
He was super experienced, and this is the one that gets me. We're not going to go through all the stops because that would be a podcast in itself. Of those 50 years, he has been either a head coach or a defensive coordinator for half of them. 25
That's
years.
Insane.
It's one of the most experienced coaches in the NFL, period. And then Todd Walsh is the defensive line coach, 29 years of coaching experience, 18 in the NFL, is a holdover from last year's staff, which again is always interesting to me when somebody says, I'm sure they asked Gio Rivero and said, hey, who are the guys that you want to try and retain? Because usually those contracts are canceled when the head coach goes. Rivero definitely had input and said, Walsh is the guy I want to keep.
So given all that information, the schematic changes, the coaching changes, how we feel about the general direction of the franchise, before we get into March and April, i.e. free agency and the draft, we look at the underdog top 3. And this is more focused on, who are the top 3 values on all these teams? We do this for every single one of these 32 teams. Who are the top 3 values that we can be targeting from a fantasy perspective? Because we all play fantasy football here, obviously. Everybody plays fantasy football. And this time of year is when everybody's doing their research on who are the sleepers? Who can I get late in the draft that's going to outperform that draft stock? Lucky for you, pretty much the entire Panthers offense. Like, there are some teams, and we'll talk about one of them tomorrow, where you're not getting any discounts.
Nope.
Like, you look at the Falcons and, Bijan's 7th overall. Drake London's going as wide receiver 10. Kirk Cousins, they're all very, very high price. Not so in Carolina. And I think that's kind of a holdover from people just not believing in this offense whatsoever. But this offense is very different than last year. And I feel like people haven't caught up to that yet. So values are there to be had. Bryce Young is going all the way at QB 26. That's appropriate, mind you. Like, I get it, especially after last year. QB 26 makes sense. Like, in a 12-team league, it's QB 3. I get it. But also, better coordinator, better offensive line, better weapons.
Yep.
Like, I feel pretty good about Bryce Young at QB 26 not ending up at QB 26. Like, I think somewhere in the late teens is absolutely possible, because it's not like Bryce Young just became a bad quarterback. Like, he was highly regarded as a prospect for a reason. A lot of people had him as the first overall pick for a reason. Like, even with CJ Stroud there too, who was a great prospect in his own right, a lot of people preferred Bryce Young because the tape was really good. So I refuse to believe that he's just a pumpkin all of a sudden. Like, and maybe he just never turns into what we think he can, but I'm not there yet. I still have a lot of belief in Bryce Young, and he's got a lot better support structure this year than last year.
Super early in his career, and if you want to do a fun exercise, and I haven't done this yet, but I might reach out to one of my more fantasy-inclined colleagues and say, hey, I bet you have this information on hand. Take a look at where Gino was the season before he started working with Canales and where he ended up, and do the same for Baker. And I guarantee they were both more lowly regarded at this point in the year, summer, before that season when they took off. And they both, Gino was a top 10 quarterback that first year working with Canales.
Oh, yeah.
And he was in no way was his ADP anywhere near the top 10.
I think he was going lower than QB 26 that year.
Right.
Like, I think he was seen as in terms of fantasy, again, I'm not saying Gino was ever seen as like a bottom 5 quarterback. He wasn't seen as like Daniel Jones. But as far as where he was being drafted, I don't think it was QB 26.
Right. So we're not saying that Bryce Young is going to achieve those heights, but he's definitely not going to stay in the depths either.
Yeah. Even if he's just average, like, we'll take average because he's going super, super late. I would say similar things for Deontay Johnson as well. He's at wide receiver 45 right now. He's the number one on the team, guys.
I was going to say, no, he's not.
He's their X. Like they've come out and said, like, he's the X receiver. He's the ass whooper. He's the guy that, we're going to do our best to give him one-on-one looks and say, go win for us. And he's perfectly capable of doing that. He's a great separator, great route runner. The one thing is you want him to keep his feet in bounds when you're throwing him 50-50 balls on the sideline. Had a terrible habit of not keeping his feet in bounds in Pittsburgh. But as far as just winning, like, he wins more than any other receiver on this team against man coverage, like, with a bullet, not even close.
Yep.
So Deontay's the one, but he's going as wide receiver 45, which means he's going as a wide receiver 4. How many number one targets in the NFL are going as wide receiver 4 in fantasy? Like, that is asinine to me.
That's one of the larger values we're going to talk about this entire series.
I get it. Adam Thielen's still there, but I'm sorry. Adam Thielen is well past his prime. He's their big slot receiver. He only got as many targets and catches as he did last year because they had literally nobody else. Like, they have other people now. They got Deontay. They got Xavier Legette. If anything, I think Adam Thielen is way overvalued at this point because people think that he's just going to, be the target hog again. He's not. It's going to be Deontay with like a little sprinkle of Xavier Legette. Like, those are the two guys that I'm indexing on. And then Jonathan Brooks, I mean, I think as long as he's healthy, which he should be, he's on pace to be back for the season. He's also a great receiving threat in his own right. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Thielen ends up as like the 4th target by the end of the year. Even if he starts the year as the 2nd target, like, the more Xavier Legette gets on the field, the less inclined they're going to be to use Adam. And the more Brooks is showing his pass catching ability, the less inclined I think they're going to be to use Thielen. Because these are all really explosive young talents, far more explosive than Thielen is at this point in his career. Like, Brooks is a great down the field receiver, which is not a common thing for running back. And, oh, by the way, he's a hell of a runner as well.
Yeah.
Like, my comparison for him is Alvin Kamara, which people see Alvin as like a receiving back, but like, Alvin's much more than that. He's 215. Like, Alvin's big. Jonathan Brooks is big. Like, he can bang between the tackles. He's a great goal line option. His vision on zone concepts is out of this world. He's got some of the best vision of any running back I've seen in years. The long speed wasn't crazy, but the short area burst was great. Again, as a receiver, he's phenomenal. Like, I love Jonathan Brooks, and he's going as RB24 right now. He's going to be the number one back on the team on an improved offensive line with way better coaches. Like, what are we doing?
I don't know that he's going to be RB1 on the team. Not to start. He will be eventually. Big Jonathan Brooks fan as well. But people, I think here, this one's a little closer to where I think the actual ranking will be, because I don't know that he's going to be starting the year as RB1.
If he is healthy, he's starting. Like, I don't want to go too far out on the limb, but this is one where I'll make an exception for. Like, Jonathan Brooks is so far and away the best running back on this team. If he's healthy,
that I'm not doubting. If he's
guy.
healthy, he is the best running back on this team. But you're still going to see, we'll call it target share, divided among Chuba Hubbard. Miles Sanders is going to get some carries. They're not better backs than Jonathan Brooks, but they are veterans and they're more experienced. I think Chuba Hubbard probably starts as RB1, and they probably do some sort of load management working.
I think that lasts 3 weeks. Like,
yeah, we'll see.
If people take Chuba, or if people take Miles Sanders, early on, good luck to you.
No, I think they're just waiting because they don't know who's going to sort themselves out in this situation. It's one of the more unclear. It's a three-headed monster, and everybody's running back by committee now, but a lot of places are only 2, and you're really leaning one way. The Brooks health thing, look, he's tracking to be healthy. If he's healthy, he's great, but was injured. Usually takes a full year to get your explosion back. They might work him in slowly. People are considering that. Chuba was really good last year for what he was given. Again, did not have a lot of support, did not have a lot of holes, did not have a lot of opening, ran really hard, held on to the football. people are just kind of, I think, in wait and see mode. It's not, we don't like Jonathan Brooks or we don't think he's eventually going to be the best back on this roster. He is. It's, what am I going to get, especially in the first half of the season with a new staff, and that uncertainty is just keeping people away.
Overall, I just really love a lot of the young talent, young skill talent on this team. It's so much better than it was last year. I have so much more confidence in the supporting cast than last year. And, as a Bryce Young fan, like I've been watching Bryce play since he was a teenager, the fact that he's going into this year and it's not another year of, I guess we're throwing 150 targets to Adam Thielen. Like the fact that we are past that now and he's got real legitimate explosiveness on the outside. He has real legitimate explosiveness in the backfield. He has a real offensive line. I just couldn't be happier for him. Like the fact that this is what we're talking about for fantasy values compared to what we were really scraping by to try to talk about last year, it's just night and day.
It is a change. It is positive. It's why 2024 is going to look significantly different and we believe better than 2023. It's the sum total of all these things. Again, they weren't bad. They had talent. It didn't get maximized. The coaching staff didn't mesh in the way that you talked about, Canales being a maximizer and being adaptable and versatile. The previous staff didn't feel that way. They were like, well, we've run this in a lot of places. You're going to learn how to run it and do it well. And everybody was like, nah, it's not working. We should switch it up. That didn't happen. So all of those reasons combining is why we're hopeful and we think 2024 is going to look very much different and a lot better.
By the way, we are recording this on June 5th, so it's very possible that some of these values change drastically between now and the time this episode goes live, or now and the time you guys watch it. Some of you might be watching this in August. So I encourage you to check out what the values are right now. I'd venture to say that if you are watching this in August, Deontay's probably not wide receiver 45 anymore. So hopefully you watch this thing early when it drops. But go check out those values right now on Underdog Fantasy, see where they're going. But just kind of use this episode as a marker of where we started the summer at, so that you can see where we end the summer at. Because I think a lot of these guys are going to be way, way higher by the time we get to everybody's draft weekend in the middle of preseason.
Yeah, they're going to pick up steam for sure.
That brings us to March. We talked earlier about how this team had a really good free agency period in terms of getting rid of some dead weight on the roster, bringing in some heavy hitters from the outside, spending a lot of money on those heavy hitters. Mind you, like Dave Tepper really cracked open the checkbook. We're going to start with the free agency losses, mostly addition by subtraction, I would say. But it really felt like they were just in kind of shed mode of like, let's look at all this bad money that we spent and just get rid of as many of these as we possibly can.
Yeah, and they did it with, again, speed that we talked about at the top of the episode. So Itur Gross-Matos, the edge, goes on to the 49ers. He played 44% of the snaps last year for Carolina, but he wasn't a priority going forward. He gets a $9 million contract. Von Bell goes from the Panthers back to the Bengals, 73% of the snaps for the Panthers last year. Deshaun Williams, interior defensive lineman, goes to the Bills. He was, again, 42% of the snaps, part of that interior rotation. DJ Chark goes to the Chargers. Hayden Hurst also goes to the Chargers. Bradley Bozeman, the center, also goes to the Chargers. So there was a very particular flow of Panthers to Chargers. Frankie Louvu is the one that really gives me a little bit of pause. He goes to the Commanders, played 93% of the snaps, signs a $10 million deal. He is an absolute ass kicker. He's a tremendous football player. I think they prioritized price, not necessarily production. That I think they probably would have liked to keep him if they could have, but it was going to be expensive. He's one that gives me a little bit of pause. Jeremy Chin goes from the Panthers to the Commanders as well, along with Louvu. Jeremy Chin really never hit the heights we thought he would as a Panther. He's a very particular type of player, and I hope he gets utilized in that role for the Commanders because I'd like to see him maximized. I'll classify that as an acceptable loss. They weren't super sad about it. Brian Burns, of course, goes to the Giants on a trade. That's a big loss, but they knew it was coming, and I think it, again, is we want to spend those dollars elsewhere. It's not that we don't like Brian Burns, but we don't want to pay him to the moon. We've got a team to build here, and we can spend those resources in multiple other places. Dante Jackson, the cornerback, traded away 85% of the snaps last year. Those are the top losses. We'll list all the losses on screen. There's a lot more. And that's very typical. When a new GM takes over, something like mid 60% of the rosters goes within the first 18 months. That's like the typical number of roster turnover percentage. They just did it in the first 4 months.
It's a lot of snaps, a lot of really high snap counts that are gone. Some hurt, like some legitimately hurt. I think Brian Burns hurts, but at the same time, they knew they could either spend on the offensive line or they could spend on Brian Burns. Priority number one is make Bryce Young work. So sorry, Brian. See you later. Great pickup for the Giants. Advantageous for the Giants. Thought it was a great deal for them, but they had to spend their money elsewhere. So that one hurts, but there are other quote unquote losses that I thought were, again, more addition by subtraction. They shall remain nameless in the interest of being diplomatic, but I didn't really see anything that was similar to, say, when we were talking about the Jaguars where, they lost Calvin Ridley and it's like, oh God, like that was A, not the plan, and also B, devastating. Like there was nothing in that mix that A, didn't strike me as planned, and B, didn't strike me as devastating. In terms of retentions, Derek Brown, again, if you're going to spend on one of those defensive linemen, they were going to spend on Derek. They see him as more of the linchpin than even Brian Burns was, which is fair. Derek Brown's an incredible player. Shaq Thompson brought him back as well. He went down early in the year last year, and their run defense really suffered because of it. It was basically Derek Brown and Frankie Louvu versus the world. Didn't go well for them. 32nd ranked run defense, but Shaq is a really, really big key to their run defense when he's healthy. Troy Hill, corner, also brought him back. The ageless Troy Hill at this point. How many times do you see a corner still getting meaningful snaps at 33? Like that's a rarity these days. And in terms of third-party additions, at least the biggest third-party additions, Nick Scott brought him in from the Bengals to play safety. Dane Jackson, a bootleg favorite at corner, brought him in to round out that DB room from Buffalo. Josie Jewell brought him in to round out the linebacker room, really just give them any other linebackers besides Shaq that are good against the run. So brought him in for only about $6.3 million. Robert Hunt, this was the first big deal they did to shore up that right guard spot. $20 million a year. Big, big, big money for a very, very good guard. Ashawn Robinson also brought him in from the Giants to round out the interior defensive line. Give them somebody else who hopefully can stop the run just a little bit. They didn't have a whole lot of that last year. Jadeveon Clowney, speaking of run-stopping defensive linemen, brought him in from Baltimore at $10 million a year. Damian Lewis, the other guard signing that they had from Seattle, again, familiarity with Dave Canales and Idzik, $13.3 million. Deontay Johnson, big acquisition from the Steelers via trade. He also got paid at $18 million, which, given the current receiver market, pretty good deal.
Downright affordable.
100%. DJ Wanham, to give them a little bit more edge depth, they brought him in from Minnesota for $6.2 million. And Jordan Fuller, safety from the Rams, at a very affordable deal, about $3.3 million. So a ton of money spent, but I thought it was very smart money spent. And if you're looking at what Burns got in New York and how they allocated that, what was it, $28 million elsewhere, and all the good players they got for roughly the same amount of money, all the very necessary players they got for roughly the same amount of money, I get it. Again, would we love to have Brian Burns on the team? Yes, but they needed so much more than just an edge rusher. Like, this roster was in really bad shape. They literally could not afford to spend that much on Brian Burns when they had so many other holes to fill. So I thought it was very smart spending on their part. They're not going to replace Burns. It's almost impossible for them to replace Burns, but in the aggregate, I still think they got a lot of bang for their buck at other positions.
It was a good, bad move.
Yeah.
It was the best move they could have made now in terms of, I agree, it's going to the past. It's one more piece of pain, Panthers fans. In terms of bungling a move overall, they had 2 number ones on the table for Brian Burns a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
They should have done it.
Oh,
hindsight
no
being 2020. They should have done it.
Even Panthers fans at the time knew they should have done it.
And they thought, hey, maybe this could work out. We don't want to hamstring our new coaching staff by giving them one less star on that side of the ball. There were a lot of decisions. They were the wrong decisions. That's why I say it was a good, bad move. They traded to the Giants for relatively much lower cost. They do get all that cash freed up they have many holes, and this is a classic case of the needs of the many versus the needs of the few. We can either pay Brian Burns or we can try and patch 6 of the 10 holes we have elsewhere. They did that, so that's why I say it was a good bad move.
So they had a very strong March overall. I think you and I both loved a lot of the moves they made. Let's turn the page to April. Very solid draft as well. Or I don't know, we haven't talked about this ahead of time, but I thought they had a really solid draft. I thought they patched a lot of the remaining needs that they had after seeing the money they spent in free agency. Kind of an underappreciated draft class, I would say, because again, they didn't have the first overall pick, and so we didn't really see them pick until later in the draft, and I think they kind of got lost in the shuffle as a result. But if you're just looking at this class as a whole, like Leggett, Brooks, Sanders, Chow Smith Wade, like top to bottom, pretty solid class.
First 6 picks I love, and that's a rarity for any draft class to be able to say, hey, first 6 guys they picked off the board. Again, they didn't pick till the end of the first round, but or top of the second round in this particular case. But when you get 6 quality players off the board in a row, you did a really good job. So when we start to say we're building a book on Dan Morgan, early returns are really good. They get Xavier Leggett, the wide receiver who we both really liked out of Carolina, with that 32nd pick. He's fills a need. They got lucky that the wide receiver, depth in this draft was tremendous. He gives them explosiveness, the ability to separate, win contested catches, physicality on the outside. Everything they needed was available at the end of the first round. They get him, Jonathan Brooks, the running back from Texas, who we're both really high on, in the second round at 46. Again, coming back from injury, but when healthy, which he was most of his career at Texas, was an absolute hammer. Was very, very effective, very talented. Reminds me a little bit of a young Sean Alexander. I'm talking about Sean Alexander coming out of college. Has some of the same tendencies in his game. Is also a very good two-way back, both receiving and running. Again, as we said earlier, we think he's going to be RB1 on this roster sooner rather than later. That may be 6 games in, that may be 2/3 of the season, but once he's established, he's not coming off the field. Folks.
No, that's it.
Trevin Wallace, the linebacker out of Kentucky, 3rd round, pick 72. So a little earlier than I thought he'd go, but I was a big Trevin Wallace fan. I'll just say that right at the top. I'm a little biased on this one. I really thought he'd go in the 4th round or a little bit later. Athletic marvel, tackling machine. I'm encouraged that they liked him this much, that they went out and got him. There wasn't a ton of inside linebacker talent, but there were other inside linebackers still on the board when they went out and got Trevin Wallace, so they really believe in what he brings to their team and will help fill in some of that gap. He's not Frankie Luvu, I'm not saying that, but he's going to be able to take some of that role because, again, I don't think they're replacing Frankie Luvu with one guy. He was that good and that involved in their defense. Jatavian Sanders, the tight end from Texas, this is Jonathan Brooks' teammate, 4th round pick 101, much later than I thought he was going to go. There was certainly some talk about why that happened, but from a talent standpoint, I think he's the 2nd best tight end in this draft behind Brock Bowers.
Also, did not drop a single pass last year. As far as contested catchers go and just reliable hands go, he probably had the best hands in this entire tight end class. Like, he got obliterated over the middle frequently. Like, those Texas quarterbacks hung him out to dry, and he didn't drop anything. Made some crazy contested catches. He's really athletic. Again, you're getting him in the 4th round. That's an awesome value.
And it's something they didn't have. It rounds out their room. They have a talented tight end, but he doesn't have these talents. So Jatavian Sanders helps build their offensive arsenal as a real seam ripper at the tight end position. Chow Wade Smith, very feisty cornerback out of Washington State in the 5th round at 157. Had a very good Senior Bowl. I thought this was appropriate value for where they got him. They certainly have need in their secondary. And then Jaden Crumedy, the interior defensive lineman from Mississippi State, all the way down the 6th round at pick 200. This is an interior plugger. This is a guy that you can get in there, gap and a half, possibly even 2 gap. I wouldn't put it that on him as a rookie, but they need some beef to go in there and just stop the run. And you can get that later in the draft, and they wait to do it. Again, appropriate value. And then the last pick, Michael Barrett, linebacker out of Michigan. Didn't watch him a ton. Obviously watched the Michigan defense, but didn't focus on Barrett that much. In the 7th round at 240. Really a special teams candidate coming in. Hopefully a backup, maybe makes the practice squad. We'll see how he develops in the system. Again, he's got some opportunity because of the linebackers they moved on, but I don't see him sort of starting or playing a high role. But we are talking about a 7th round pick at this point.
I think my favorite pick in this class, other than Brooks, is going to be the first one, Xavier Legette. He was one of my highest rated receivers in this class. I thought he could have gone as early as the early 20s. And I understand I was higher on Xavier than a lot of other people. I get it. The 1 year wonder tag
For sure.
followed him around. But at the same time, there's a lot of context to that. If you're looking at everything that went on in Xavier Legette's personal life and everything that's happened in the last 5 years, like the kid's been through a lot, right? But he has just unassailable football character. Like the coaches raved about him, like how hard he practiced, how dedicated he was to getting better, how dedicated he was to getting over, the obstacles placed in front of him in his life. And he did that. Like he just worked and worked and worked. It took 4 years, but he finally got his chance to shine in a bowl game in his senior year. He balled out, came back for a 5th year, said like, I'm going to do what I did in that bowl game, but every week. And he held true to his word. Like he balled the hell out. And seeing somebody overcome everything that he overcame, and seeing somebody who was a highly regarded athlete coming out of high school, made a position switch, survived a couple coaching staffs, seeing him not give up, not transfer, but like really commit to the process and embrace the process of improving as a player and fighting for that roster spot and fighting for that starting opportunity and then getting that opportunity and capitalizing on that opportunity. Like I love everything about Xavier Legette. It's not just about how talented he is. Obviously he's talented. It's about the character of the person that Carolina just drafted. This kid is going to go balls to the wall every single day. Every single practice, every single game. Like you are never going to worry about Xavier Legette trying to get better or trying to maximize this opportunity to be an NFL player. Like you give this kid $30 million in a second contract, I will sleep easy at night because he's the kind of character that I trust with this opportunity, right? There's a lot of receivers, or not even receivers, there's a lot of players coming out of college. It's like, can you trust them with the opportunity of being an NFL player and all the responsibility that comes with that? Because so much about being an NFL player is being accountable to yourself to get better every single day, to put in the work in the offseason, to put in the work with quarterbacks. And the best players in the NFL are the ones that hold themselves accountable and have that kind of work ethic. It's not just about being talented, it's about working your ass off when nobody's watching. And Xavier Legette is that kind of guy. He is that kind of football character that I can trust to maximize this opportunity. That is why he was worth a first-round pick. It's not just about physical talent. It's about the guy in the room. He's that kind of guy.
Love Legette. He feels a need. I think he's going to be on the field quickly. I don't know that he's going to be super productive quickly, but again, that doesn't give me any doubt that he's going to stop working or give up or get discouraged. All the things that happen to rookie receivers when everybody makes the jump from college to the pros. He's going to double down. He's going to say, nope, learn from my mistakes. He's going to work his way into that role. And even if he never becomes a true number one, I have every confidence he's going to be like a high level number 2 that's super impactful week in, week out.
That brings us to UDFAs, EJ's favorite section. This is a long list. Like they brought in a lot of guys, and I get it. There's a lot of roster turnover. It's a new regime. They're trying to just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks.
Yep.
So they brought in as many priority UDFAs as they possibly could. Paying out bonuses like crazy. So yeah, let's see who makes it, right? So Jack Plummer, he's probably one of the bigger names they brought in, the Louisville quarterback. He's going to be fighting for that QB3 spot. Probably will end up on the practice squad. Jaden Sheridan, the running back out of Monmouth. He had a really good Shrine Bowl week. We really, really like Jaden Sheridan. Again, he's going to be competing for an RB4 spot for them, which is likely going to be practice squad, but still, he's got a shot at making the practice squad. Jalen Coker, extraordinarily gifted receiver. I would not be shocked if he makes the final 53. This kid is a crazy talent. I'm actually really surprised he didn't get drafted. I thought he easily could have gone as early as the 5th round. Not to throw this comp on him as a player, but I'm talking as a mover in terms of how he moves. He reminds me a lot of Demaryius Thomas. Just a big, explosive, fluid athlete. Again, I'm not saying he's the receiver that DT is or DT was, back when he was playing, but as a physical talent, he reminds me a lot of DT. Like, he's just a crazy, crazy athlete. And then Damani Richardson, the safety out of Texas A&M, another big name UDFA they brought in at a position of need where they need another guy to fill out that rotation. There's just so many names on this list. I can't go through all of them, but we tend to see this with new coaching staffs of bring in as many as we possibly can because we got a roster to make over.
Yeah, and we need as many, you can call them lottery cards, whatever you want, as we can get, because you don't know who's going to stick, who's going to take to the new program, who's not, and finding quote-unquote free talent from the UDFA pool is something that I think all new coaching staffs should do. Some of them look at it very differently and say that's kind of a distraction. The chances are low. We don't want to split our time spending, time evaluating those guys. We'd rather have a smaller group and focus on them. I understand that. It's a difference in philosophy. I'm all for it as a draft guy. Take close looks at as many players as you can, because even if you only find one or two diamonds in the rough that end up making the practice squad out of this bunch, it was for free. You spent no draft capital on it.
Like we said, folks, front to back, it's been a great offseason. They did a phenomenal job making over this roster as much as they possibly could in just 1 year. Not all the way there yet, obviously, but well on their way. So Panthers fans should be pretty stoked about the last 6 months, I would say. And that brings us to our summary, where we have 2 questions we always answer at the end of every episode. The first one being, is this team better than this time last year? And we do that by saying either thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs even. Thumbs up, are they better? Thumbs down, are they worse? Thumbs even, which is basically just through all the additions and subtractions added together, are they roughly the same but for different reasons? Like same but different but same. For us, unequivocally, not even a debate, thumbs up. This team is much, much better than this time last year.
Yeah, Canales is going to be great for Bryce. That's probably the biggest storyline that you're going to hear. If you hear any from the national media, that'll be the one. But the lesser known storylines or less looked at storylines outside of Carolina that are equally important is Gilbert should stabilize the offensive line. Damian Lewis is a big add. Hunt's a big add. Wide receiver weapons are improved. They still need young players to step up, but they have more raw materials than they did last year. It's more possible. Defensive line's not going to be flashy outside of Brown, but should be solid with the additions of Robinson and Clowney and Wanham. All those guys are heavy setters that are going to give them some stability against the run, which they desperately needed. And they still desperately need another year of roster refurb or rehab or turnover or what you want to say, but there's no way to look at this roster versus the last one and say they're worse off. You got to say thumbs up.
And that brings us to the last question then, which is ceiling and floor. What's the ceiling in wins? What's the floor in wins? The fact that my floor for them is twice as high as the ceiling they hit last year says a lot for how improved this roster is. My floor is 4 wins. My ceiling is a very respectable 8 wins, which would put them, around the middle of the league. I don't think they're going to challenge for a playoff spot. The NFC South itself, I think, is pretty improved this year. I don't think they're going to make a run at the division, but I think they're going to be potentially mid. And Panthers fans would love to be mid. That would be a welcome change of pace. Oh my God, we're average. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. I think they have a legitimate shot to be average this year. And then 2025 is when we start talking about, can they win the NFC South?
Yeah, I'm the same. Ceiling of 8, floor of 4. Pressing for 500 on a team that last year won 2 games and I think was maybe lucky to win one of those is a tremendous improvement and couldn't happen without all the turnover that we've talked about for the entire episode. GM, coaching, we'll say ownership perspective has shifted. The roster's definitely improved. How quickly it comes together, again, I don't think they're going to be a worst to first. It's not that kind of story in Carolina. But again, significant improvement. If you're winning 4 times as many games, if they hit their ceiling that we're predicting of 8 and they're, tickling 500 until the last week of the season, that would be a massive improvement. Even if this team wins 6 games and is in 4 more but loses them late, that's a competitive, competent team, which were the goals we talked about at the top of the season. And if you look at all the boxes, and there were many boxes they needed to check at the beginning of this year, like how many of these actions that we've talked about have given them reasonable confidence that that box is checked and is not going to be a problem again? The answer is most of them. There are very few boxes left unchecked, and if they are, it's not because the owner wouldn't spend money or they weren't aggressive or they didn't commit to change. Like, they did all of those things. They just had too many boxes to check in one offseason, so there are a few left, but most of them got checked. So these were very purposeful actions aimed at fixing the things that were wrong.
Next year is when, they add more pass rushers. Next year is probably when, they go after offensive line depth, not starting offensive line, but offensive line depth. They probably add another receiver next year. They probably add like another nickel next year. But that's kind of the list. And you compare that list of needs, like that shopping list for next offseason compared to the one they had this year, which was like, I don't know, throw a dart at the entire fucking depth chart.
You know what it reminds me of is those movies where the person's got a shopping cart and they're going down the aisle with the arm out, just going gung, 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 just filling up the cart. That was the Panthers this offseason.
But they did it. They did it. Like, it's going to be a watchable team, and that's the goal. Like, be watchable this year, be a contender next year. They're well on their way. So, Panthers fans, hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys agree with us too, because I know it's so easy as a fan of this team to just be kind of locked in this state of dread and pessimism.
Oh, we're bad again.
I give you permission to be excited to watch them. Like, you're allowed to open up your heart again. And I know it's been a while since you could do that, but I really do think they're going to be average, which is a welcome change of pace. And I think you're actually going to have fun watching football in 2024. If you want to celebrate being watchable, by the way, you can go get Panthers gear on our clothing partner, Homage. EJ's actually wearing an Homage Panthers shirt right now. They have an NFL license, so you can get gear for every single team. Even if you're not a Panthers fan watching this, you can get gear for your own team. You can get bootleg gear. You can get a whole bunch of different films and TV shows. And I mean, they have gear for pretty much everything. They have a crazy amount of licenses. They have college football as well. So just check out what Homage has. You don't have to get NFL or bootleg gear. Anything you get at that link in the description below, we get a direct cut of. So it's a great way to directly support your team and indirectly support us. So thank you once again to Homage for working with us. Thank you to all of our patrons and executive producers for also being longtime supporters of us and helping to make this show possible. They've been with us since the beginning, and we do not take that lightly because they've invested a lot of their time and money into making this show a success. So thank you to all of our patrons as well. With that, EJ, I think we're going to get you out of the sun before you get even more sunburn.
What's left of me?
And we'll come back and we'll talk Falcons tomorrow. So make sure to come back for that. See you then.